When the P-38 Lightning first tore across the skies of the Pacific, Japanese pilots didn't know whether to laugh or worry. Against the backdrop of blue ocean and clouds, it looked like something that had wandered in from another world. Two slender booms stretching back in parallel, a lone cockpit pod suspended between them, and long, gleaming wings catching the sun. To American crews, it was the fork-tailed devil, a name born not in the Pacific, but in Europe, whispered with unease by Luftwaffe pilots who had already learned to fear it. But over the Pacific, rumors of this bizarre craft began trickling into Japanese intelligence reports. Was this really a game-changer, or just another heavy, awkward American brute? That question lingered in mess halls and briefing rooms, until long-range ambushes and chilling testimonies from pilots who barely made it home began painting a clearer, more unsettling picture. By late 1942, when the P-38 officially joined the Pacific fight, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service stood at the height of its confidence. The A-6M0 had ruled the early campaigns, cutting down Allied aircraft in frightening numbers and feeding Japan's belief in its own unshakable aerial supremacy. Yet, while Japan basked in its dominance, across the ocean the Americans had been quietly shaping something different. Not a nimble turn fighter for swirling dogfights, but a high-speed predator built for altitude, reach, and raw striking power. In Europe, the Lightning was already proving itself both as a long-range escort and as a deadly interceptor. But in the vast Pacific, it offered something even more valuable: the ability to strike Japanese planes far from their home bases, over endless stretches of open water, and to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. For Japanese pilots, this strange newcomer wasn't just another opponent. It was the herald of a completely different kind of war. The P-38 Lightning didn't just look different, it was different. Beneath its alien-like silhouette lay engineering choices the Japanese had never faced before. Its twin Allison V-1710 turbo-supercharged engines could drive it past 400 miles per hour, a speed that stunned Japanese analysts accustomed to American fighters that were typically 50 to 80 miles per hour slower than the Zero. That leap in speed alone forced a rethink. This was not something the Zero could easily outrun. Its combat range was equally shocking, over 1,000 miles. That meant the Lightning could patrol enormous stretches of ocean, chase an enemy far beyond the reach of most fighters, fight, and still have enough fuel to come home. For Japanese crews used to short-range encounters, it was an unnerving thought. And then there was its firepower. Every weapon it carried, one 20mm Hispano cannon and 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns, was concentrated in the nose. No need to worry about the convergence point of wing-mounted guns. Every round traveled the same deadly trajectory. That meant a Lightning could start tearing into a target from much farther out than a Zero could safely engage. Japanese pilots who survived their first encounters with the P-38 later spoke in grudging respect of its terrifying accuracy. Fully loaded, the P-38 tipped the scales at over 17,000 pounds, more than triple the weight of the A-6M0. On paper, that sounded like a death sentence for maneuverability. But the Lightning's tricycle landing gear and counter-rotating propellers canceled out the torque roll that plagued many single-engine fighters, giving it stability in steep dives and sharp climbs. The contrast was stark. The Zero's light frame made it incredibly agile, but fragile. Even a short burst of enemy fire could send it spiraling into the sea. The P-38, by comparison, could take a pounding, holes in the wings, oil leaking from one engine, and still limp back to base. What had seemed to Japanese intelligence like a lumbering giant was, in reality, a long-range assassin built for a kind of war Japan had not prepared to fight. The P-38 Lightning's journey from sketchpad to battlefield was anything but smooth. When Lockheed unveiled its radical twin-boom concept in 1937, it looked like nothing the U.S. Army Air Corps, or any Air Force, had ever seen. At a time when many fighters still clung to design elements from the biplane era, the Lightning's sleek, futuristic shape seemed almost too bold. Some senior officers dismissed it as an over-engineered gamble, doubting it would ever be practical in combat. Those doubts only deepened during its early test flights. Problems surfaced quickly. In extended climbs, the engines overheated to dangerous levels. At high altitude, cockpit canopies frosted over, leaving pilots flying blind. In steep, high-speed dives, pilots discovered an even more terrifying flaw: compressibility. Past 500 miles per hour, airflow over the control surfaces locked them stiff, trapping the aircraft in a near vertical plunge. Several talented test pilots lost their lives before engineers even understood the phenomenon. The Lightning was also heavy. Every improvement added more weight. Armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, extra ammunition. All pushed it further away from the nimble dogfighter profile that many in the Air Corps still preferred. Some officials argued for scrapping the entire program, redirecting resources to proven single-engine designs like the P-40 Warhawk or P-39 Airacobra. But Lockheed refused to surrender. Its engineers refined the turbo superchargers for better high-altitude performance, redesigned cooling systems to prevent overheating, and eventually developed dive recovery flaps that allowed pilots to pull out safely from those deadly high-speed dives. Piece by piece, the Lightning evolved into something unique, an aircraft that could fly higher, faster, and farther than any Japanese fighter in service. By late 1942, the Pacific Theater desperately needed an aircraft with extreme range and heavy firepower, and the P-38 was ready to deliver. It still had quirks, but over the vast blue deserts of the Pacific, its very differences became advantages. This was no longer an experiment. It was a weapon perfectly suited to the war it was about to fight. The Lightning's baptism of fire in the Pacific came in late 1942 and early 1943, and it was an eye-opener for both sides. At first, Japanese pilots treated it with the same casual disdain they'd shown other American aircraft. To them, it was heavy, slow to turn, and surely easy prey if drawn into a classic turning duel. But the P-38 refused to play by those rules. American pilots quickly realized they couldn't match the Zero in a close-in dogfight, so they didn't try. Instead, they fought on their own terms, using boom and zoom tactics, diving from high altitude at blistering speed, unleashing a precise burst from their nose-mounted guns, and then climbing away before the Zero could react. The Lightning's speed meant it could disengage whenever it wanted, a luxury that infuriated Japanese aces used to trapping opponents in prolonged, swirling battles. Even more unsettling for Japan's air command was the Lightning's ability to escort bombers far beyond the range of the Zero. Missions that once left slow-moving bombers exposed now had a wall of P-38s clearing the skies. Reports from Rabaul and Bougainville began noting the same disturbing fact. The Lightning could appear over target areas without warning, linger there longer than expected, and still make it back to base. The P-38's most famous moment came in April 1943 with Operation Vengeance, the audacious mission to intercept and kill Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind of Pearl Harbor. Flying 435 miles from Guadalcanal, skimming just above the waves to avoid detection, P-38s reached the exact stretch of sky at the exact moment Yamamoto's transport plane appeared. The Japanese admiral never made it back. That single mission proved the Lightning wasn't just another fighter. It was a strategic weapon, capable of striking deep into the heart of Japan's war plans. From that point on, the Japanese could no longer ignore it. The Lightning had drawn first blood in a way that was both tactical and psychological, altering how the enemy viewed every mission that followed. Japanese intelligence reports from 1943 reveal a fascinating evolution in how the P-38 was regarded. Early in the year, official evaluations were dismissive. The Lightning was labeled an overbuilt bomber escort, with poor turning ability, a bulky, speed-focused machine that seasoned Zero pilots could supposedly outmaneuver without much trouble. That confidence came from doctrine. The Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service believed agility was king, and speed was secondary. But as months passed, the tone began to change. By late 1943, internal memos carried a stark new warning. The P-38 was a dangerous high-speed attacker that demanded extreme caution. Pilots returning from encounters reported that its greatest danger was not in a turning duel, but in avoiding one entirely. If a P-38 got behind you, its blistering diving speed made escape nearly impossible. One Japanese pilot described it in his diary. It comes from above like a hawk, strikes, and is gone before your guns can speak. The Lightning's long range added another layer of frustration. It could appear seemingly from nowhere, engage briefly, vanish into cloud cover, and reappear minutes later from a completely different direction. This unpredictability forced Japanese pilots to stay on constant high alert, even when the skies looked clear. By 1944, the Lightning's reputation among Japanese aviators had shifted from curiosity to calculated threat. It wasn't invincible. Experienced Zero pilots could still exploit its slower roll rate in tight turns. But it demanded respect every time it appeared. For Japanese planners, it became a priority target, a reminder of the vulnerabilities of their short-range fighters in the boundless, unforgiving airspace of the Pacific. If the Lightning's engineering impressed Japanese analysts, its tactics outright unsettled them. In the early days of the Pacific War, many American pilots had made the fatal mistake of trying to match the Zero in tight, turning dogfights. A battle the Zero almost always won. But Lightning squadrons learned quickly. Survival meant refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. From the moment the P-38 entered the theater, squadron leaders drilled boom and zoom, attacks until they were muscle memory, dive from high altitude at maximum speed, deliver a short, devastating burst from the nose-mounted guns, then climb back to safety before the Zero could respond. This method erased the Zero's biggest advantage, its unmatched maneuverability. The P-38's turbo-supercharged engines gave it another edge, the ability to maintain speed and power at altitudes where the Zero struggled. This meant American pilots could choose when and where to engage, dictating the flow of combat instead of reacting to it. Team tactics evolved just as rapidly. Two ship elements coordinated their attacks like predators hunting in pairs. One Lightning would lure Japanese fighters into a climb, only for the other to dive in unseen and strike from above. The precision of the nose-mounted armament allowed these slashing passes to be deadly even from longer distances, forcing Japanese pilots to break off before getting close enough to fight back. For many Japanese aviators, this was more than frustrating. It was almost insulting. The refusal to engage in an honorable, turning duel clashed with their combat ethos. Lightning pilots exploited that mindset without hesitation, turning the psychological weight of tradition into a tactical weapon. By mid-1943, Tokyo's air planners were no longer brushing the P-38 aside. They were actively studying it, searching for countermeasures, changing escort patterns, and trying to adapt to a threat that didn't just fight differently, but thought differently. If the P-38 changed how the Japanese fought, it also changed how they felt about fighting. In the early months of the war, Japanese pilots climbed into their Zeros with almost unshakable confidence. Their agility, training, and early victories had built an aura of invincibility. But the Lightning broke that illusion, not by meeting them in the turning duels they excelled at, but by refusing those duels entirely. Reports from Japanese squadrons in the Solomons and New Guinea began to tell the same story. The P-38 could appear where it wasn't expected, far behind enemy lines, and vanish just as quickly. Its speed and climb rate meant that once it was on your tail, there was little chance of shaking it. Pilots began to speak of a double-edged fear. The fear of being caught by a Lightning, and the fear of missing the chance to hit it before it disappeared. Today, psychologists might call it anticipatory anxiety. In the cockpit of a Zero, it translated into hesitation, a dangerous pause before committing to an attack. That pause could be fatal. The Lightning's ruggedness only deepened the frustration. Japanese veterans recalled pouring streams of fire into a P-38, watching it trail smoke, and expecting it to fall, only to see it dive away, level out, and keep flying. The Zero, with its light frame and minimal armor, could never survive that kind of punishment. By 1944, the mental shift was undeniable. Veteran aces who had once flown with reckless aggression began making more cautious choices. Risky maneuvers were avoided if there was even a chance a P-38 might be nearby. The Lightning had become more than a physical threat. It was a shadow over the Japanese pilot's mind, eroding the confidence that had once been their greatest weapon. The P-38 Lightning's legacy in the Pacific wasn't measured solely by its kill count, though its record against both Japanese and German aircraft was formidable. Its deeper impact lay in how it reshaped the air war itself. It forced Japan to confront a hard truth. In modern aerial combat, speed, firepower, and range could outweigh maneuverability. For the Americans, it proved that a fighter didn't have to be the best in every category. It just had to be designed for the right tactics and the right battlefield. The Lightning's extreme range allowed for deep penetration sweeps and long-range bomber escorts, steadily eroding Japan's air defenses and wearing down its pool of experienced pilots. By 1944, the average Japanese naval aviator had only a fraction of the flight hours of his pre-war predecessors. A gap that accelerated Japan's decline in the air. The P-38 was a major contributor to that attrition, often striking in places the Japanese believed were safe. Its influence reached far beyond World War II. Concentrated nose-mounted firepower, high-speed hit-and-run tactics, and an emphasis on pilot survivability became recurring themes in U.S. fighter design, visible in aircraft like the F-86 Sabre and even in modern multi-role jets. Yet perhaps its most enduring victory was psychological. The Lightning gained and kept a mental edge over its opponents. Even when Japanese pilots developed counter-tactics, the knowledge that a P-38 could appear without warning and leave just as quickly lingered in their minds. It had gone from an odd silhouette on the horizon to a symbol of relentless, calculated, and unconventional warfare. Today, only a handful of Lightnings still fly. Their distinctive twin-boom hum still turns heads at airshows, drawing both veterans and history enthusiasts to watch them in the sky one more time. For those who fought with or against it, the P-38 remains more than an aircraft. It's a reminder that wars are often won not by the perfect machine on paper, but by the one flown with discipline, ingenuity, and an unshakable will to adapt.